The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles have a rich video game legacy indeed, with the franchise's release from between the 1980s and mid-90s still proving popular amongst gamers today. The TMNT Cowabunga collection has recently further emphasised people's love for these Konami classics, but what is often ignored is that Konami would have a second run of regularly releasing Turtles video games. In the past, we have already looked at many of the beat-em-ups they were published during this strange period, but what we are yet to cover is the fighting game released by Konami during the Turtles' second coming. So today, let's change that and look at the history of 2005's rarely spoken about Turtles fighter. So, would this title be a proper return to gaming relevancy for the heroes in the half shell, or was this a half-baked attempt to ride the coattails of other big party fighters of the period? Let's find out. Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. This is the story of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Melee. Yeah! In 2005, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were in a bit of an upswing. What you could even call an uppercut, as the disastrous last days of the original cartoon series had been the better part of a decade past, and the bad taste of the last movie and the Saban live-action Next Mutation series had outright been forgotten. The more recent For Kids Entertainment cartoon, on the other hand, had made a strong premiere. Rejuvenated and reinstated as a solid children's television franchise, the new franchise took on a fair amount of anime influences, bailing on the 1980s cartoon aesthetic for a more angular, darker and stylish series that fits better in the then recent era of Pokemon, Dragon Ball Z and Batman Beyond. Children's cartoons could be stylish and a bit more violent than what was comfortably airing in the days where Saturday morning cartoons were king. And interestingly, this art style was closer in line with the franchise's comic book roots anyway. Konami's license for the franchise had persisted, but the evolution of console technology had left behind their strong days of side-scrollers with great pixel art and tight D-pad based controls. By 2005, the console wars were no longer being held between the Sega Mega Drive and the Super Nintendo, but instead a three-horse race consisting of the Microsoft Xbox, Nintendo GameCube and Sony PlayStation 2. In the Turtles' hibernation period, they effectively skipped the 32 and 64-bit eras. While the years preceding this hibernation are wonderfully collected in the recently released Cowabunga collection, the Konami Turtles games of the noughties have yet to be given the same treatment or recognition. In the second era of Turtles gaming, parallel with the launch of the new TV series, as of 2003, Konami began releasing 3D based brawlers based around the new show. To start off, the three main systems and Microsoft Windows and Game Boy Advance all received a beat-em-up simply titled Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. The follow-up Battle Nexus continued the series with lesser scores on the same consoles. Focusing on 4-player action, reviewers took issue with all of the releases, with Metacritic showing that the best of the punch were the 2D Game Boy Advance iterations, which capped out at a 65 out of 100. When the highlight of the console versions is a port of the original arcade TMNT game, Konami knew they had to review what they were doing with the series. The result of this introspection would result in the team appearing to look at other video game genres in order to find inspiration. While beat-em-ups were clearly becoming more and more of a niche offering, arena party fighting games were clearly on the rise, with a Sega Dreamcast Power Stone proving to be a cult favourite amongst these. Or, of even more interest to Konami was of course Nintendo's Super Smash Bros. Melee, a chaotic 4-player title celebrating Nintendo's biggest IPs that not only proved to be one of the most critically well received games on the GameCube, but it would end up being the most popular game sold on the hardware, shifting an incredible 7 million sales. Not bad for a game on a console that only sold 21 million units to begin with, meaning 1 in every 3 GameCube owners had Smash in their personal collection. So, looking to this massive success story, Konami were hoping that by taking a dose of inspiration from it, Mutant Melee could be a proper return to form and gaming relevancy for the awesome foursome. As you likely know, with 2D beat-em-up fatigue setting in the past, along with the rise of Street Fighter 2, this would not be the first time Konami had changed directions with their Turtles games, as during the tail end of the golden era of Turtles gaming, we would of course get the tournament fighter games, which were heavily influenced by Capcom's World Warriors competing against one another. As for these 3 Turtles fighters, each title spread out over the Mega Drive, Super Nintendo, and even the original NES took divergent paths, featured different rosters, and played and looked different from one another. While they were all focused on 1v1 gameplay, roughly based on the iconic Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat titles that dominated arcades in the 90s, each had their own highlights. The Super NES iteration was easily both the most technically adept and graphically impressive of the trio, with Digital Eclipse choosing to boost this iteration with rollback netcode multiplayer with its recent outing as part of the Cowabunga collection. Many now consider this video game a classic, which raises the question as to why Konami didn't just simply make a direct 2005 sequel to this one. As for their reasoning, I guess it all comes down to timing, with traditional fighters like this not exactly being on vogue halfway through the first decade of this millennium. With time having passed, the fighting game genre had changed a fair amount. Mortal Kombat was puttering around, Street Fighter was largely on the break, and polygonal battlers took charge of the genre. So, as already mentioned, Konami would aim to create something they considered a little more modern, something a little less street fighty, and a little more smashy, or Power Stone-y. Previously, the Power Stone games let players roam a 3D battlefield, pick up the titular Power Stones and effectively go Super Saiyan and level up over the course of a battle. The title, developed on the Sega Naomi, quickly became a highlight of the Sega Dreamcast's built-in 4-player support and arcade ports. Konami Hawaii must have been having a few late nights while developing Battle Nexus. It's not hard to imagine the devs taking a break from developing their own games, cracking open a case of Zima, and going to town in both fighters, finding inspiration for the next title they would be working on. Given that Mutant Melee was released less than half a year after Battle Nexus, the crunch time may have led to inspiration coming from any place they could find, instead of devoting time to developing wholly new concepts. Even a simple look at the title shows that they cribbed Melee from Nintendo, with the marketing team potentially thinking this would be a great way to ride the coattails of the most lucrative title on the GameCube. Checking out the title that was delivered on shelves in March 2005, players are provided with 4 core multiplayer game modes, each focused on the same gameplay with different win requirements. These consist of Last Man Standing, which, as the name states, consists of your hero or villain of choice having to manage to hold out for as long as possible, taking down as many enemies as they can, while surviving to the end being the player's main goal. There is a knockout mode that involves going for the largest kill count, rewarding a player with the most defeated opponents in a set amount of time. There is a King of the Hill mode, which has players chasing a light beam that traverses the map, with gamers being rewarded for points the longer they stay within the beam. And lastly, there is a Keep Away mode, which has players fighting for a chest. The person who carries the chest will have to run away from the others, but is given no offensive moves during that time. Building on all of this, there is also a rudimentary adventure mode that sends the cast through 100 challenges, fighting enemies, dodging bombs, and other miscellany that would keep those indulging in a single player campaign entertained for a few hours. But this play mode doesn't offer much in the way of replayability. A number of characters and levels can be unlocked over the course of the game, revealing new unlockables for the multiplayer mode as players traverse the adventure mode, at the very least gives players a reason to persist with this one. Once players have been unlocked and redeemed, there's 22 characters, though the cast is a bit padded out by characters like Casey Jones and April O'Neil's existing 3 times. Consisting of their traditional outfits, summer outfits for all you basement dwelling nerds who want April in a bikini like some sort of low budget Dead or Alive extreme beach volleyball, and the winter one for those with a bit more prudish desires. Likewise, Shredder exists in traditional golden variants, along with the Oroku Saki iteration. Almost insultingly, all these variants exist as separate character icons on the character select screen, padded out the numbers when they could have easily existed under a colour variant selection. They should have just called this game Turtles Tournament Fighter 18 Persons Edition, in my opinion. Despite all of this, there is no arguing that, like the superior Super Smash Bros. Melee, it's at least nice to give some sort of goal for completing adventures. But even Dr. Mario has more variety from his base form than bloody Summer, Attire, April O'Neil. I think I prefer Jen and Takuma. As for those looking to experience this one, with the adventure mode you can only start out with the 4 main turtles at the beginning, with the format planned out much like the challenges in Super Smash Bros. Melee, presenting characters with both specific fights and specific tasks. The arenas feature standard platformer and brawler elements like conveyor belts, destructible crates, and weapons that the player can pick up, and not a whole lot else. Everything looks very bland and generic, with the game's uninspiring locations consisting of arenas such as a factory or the streets of New York. Only the occasional car crashing through the back alley sometimes breaks up the monotony. A limited library exists to also allow players to review unlockables such as outtakes and Playmates toy commercials, which at least is an attempt to expand the disc's content in some ways. GameSpot would savagely critique the game by giving it a 4.3 review, saying,
Mutant Melee is so low quality that it's hard to believe it took a full 6 months of development time to put it together. This is an incredibly slapdash and barren game that has absolutely nothing to offer you beyond monotonous, almost broken fighting mechanics, tiny environments, and a bunch of lame unlockables. If you were holding out hope that Konami would finally write the Turtle franchise, Mutant Melee may be the last sign you'll need to finally abandon any and all faith.
IGN giving the game a slight and nicer 5.5 piled on with,
it lacks the humor and charm of the original show, and even the new one for that matter. It gives you plenty of characters, but no real reason to prefer one over the other. The two different game modes cough up a little amusement, but it gets old fast.
It's clear that throughout a playthrough, Konami was trying to ape the success of two bigger fighters from recent years. With Power Stone having an upgrade system to allow players to drastically change their gameplay during a match, and a cast that didn't by default have 4 characters that many would outright consider duplicates of one another at the start, matches were vibrant, frenetic, and out of the box a blast. The PlayStation 2 version of Mutant Melee, on the other hand, requires the multi-tap adapter for 4-player support, and all that gives you is a rather drab set of levels with characters that beyond the 4 turtles, the Rat, the Wolverine knockoff, and their 2 human allies would be largely new to any legacy players only having experienced the original series. It's nice to build a new legacy, but it's hard to imagine a player sitting down and being pumped to play as Hun, Sleek, or Traximus. Children of the early noughties may have been excited, but the adults who owned an Xbox at the time would likely not know who they were. This is part of the reason why Super Smash Bros. Melee did so well on the GameCube. Characters recruited for the fight existed across all generations of Nintendo, from the arcade antics of the Ice Climbers to modern childhood heroes like Pichu and Kid Link. Super Smash Bros. Offered recognisable fighters for everyone, and that is without even taking its awesome gameplay into account. Konami would go back to their laurels with the beat-em-up genre in their final contribution to the franchise, until 2022's Cowabunga collection, which was Mutant Nightmare. But that doesn't mean it was the end of the Turtles franchise copying Nintendo's homework in the future, as Ubisoft would give it their own shot of ripping off Smash Bros. With Turtles Smash Up, which draws even more of a direct parallel to the Super Smash Bros. Series. So if hearing more about such a game interests you, that's a story for another time, so subscribe now if you would like to hear about that one down the line. Anyway, want to learn more about Turtles games from this time period? Click my 2003 era Turtles playlist now. Cheerio.